The war had ended 1,000 years ago, yet somehow humanity still carried its scars among the stars. Thin silvered lines where old fires had cooled, stories whispered through vacuum, names carved into hull plates that outlasted suns. The desert world below wore its scars more honestly. Khelor IV stretched red and endless beneath a dim, tired sun, its mesas like teeth, its wind a rasping breath that had learned patience from stone. A small human reconnaissance shuttle lay broken upon that stone, half buried, tilted like a blade that had missed its mark. Smoke unwound into the sky. In the glare stood a single figure, helmet off, face chapped by the dry. Captain Jace Arlen, 3rd Expeditionary, watched the horizon shimmer and tried to make his memory obey him. The crash, the alarms, the sudden rip through the fabric of space that bent the shuttle like a toy. Yes. The faint echo in his comms, voices like his own, but wrong, yes. Then the sand, the heat, the silence. He counted his breaths until his hands stopped shaking. Above, the air shivered. A shadow slid across his boots. No engine roar, no dust devils, only a pressure that settled into his bones as if he had always been wearing it. He looked up. A disc-shaped vessel drifted less than 20 meters above the ground, matte silver and old like lullabies sung before speech learned to stand upright. It made a sound like held breath. A seam opened underneath, and the desert's light softened as if out of respect. She stepped down on that light, blue skin like dusk about to become night, hair the color of starlight reflected in glacial ice. Armor that was not for war but for memory, it fit like duty. She walked toward him down a ramp that wasn't, feet unmarking the sand, cloak brushing the air instead of the ground. She didn't draw a weapon, she didn't smile. "You're late," the alien girl whispered. He had never seen her in his life. He knew that with the ferocity with which one knows names of lost parents or the taste of home water. Jace tried to find language that could stand upright beside her. "We've never met. Not like this." She studied his eyes as if checking an old star chart for new drift. "But we do not have the luxury of meeting twice." He had trained under vacuum fires and falling hulls, but the way her voice handled time knocked something loose in him, like a hatch unlatched from the inside. He set his jaw. "I'm Captain Jace Arlen, 3rd, Captain." She tasted the word. "Yes, I am Lysa of the Sellara. That is the name you will remember. Come." "Where?" "Out of here to begin with." She turned her head slightly. Over Jace's shoulder the shuttle groaned, metal complaining about the gravity that had become a stranger. The desert is not empty, it listens, it repeats. He almost asked what that meant. Then the ground, it hummed. The sand beneath the shuttle went glassy with heat that was not heat. A black sphere rose through it like a thought refusing to drown. It was slick without shine, absorbing light so completely that it bled color from the world around. It pulsed with a heartbeat that wasn't his, and yet matched his pulse until he felt sick. Lysa's fingers brushed his forearm, not a tug, permission. He moved with her toward the hovering vessel that still made the air feel like church. The sphere quivered. A voice issued from it, a perfect copy of Jace's voice from yesterday's flight log. "We are here, we are here, we are." It glitched, then became the voice of his dead sister, recorded on a childhood toy, saying his name through static. Jace tasted rust. "What is that?" "Your first confession to the sky," Lysa said, and sadness darkened her eyes. Broken and hungry for the mouth that made it, move. He moved, the ramp swallowed them. The hull closed like a thought tightened into focus. Inside, the ship was a whispering cathedral. Pale corridors curved without corners. Controls grew like veins in bone. The air was dry clean and faintly cold, like snow remembered a week late. Jace fought for an anchor. "We sent the first signal 1,000 years ago." The echoes did not stop. Lysa's hand grazed a panel. Symbols blinked softly as if asking for gentleness. The ship responded not with speed but with a change in posture, like a predator shifting weight. The desert fell away behind them. On a display, the black sphere lifted from the sand without dust, without hurry. It did not need hurry. Its hunger had learned patience from mummified suns. Threads extended from it, seeking like hands trained by absence. "I'm armed," Jace said reflexively. If it comes aboard, we no longer live in a place where weapons mean what you think they mean." Lysa looked at him. "You call it a sphere because that is how dimension treats your eyes. Where it truly lives, the shape is called a name. It is a net made of voices, human voices for the most part." Jace's mouth went dry. "Our transmissions. Your hope, condensed until it crushed itself into hunger." Her tone didn't blame, it mourned. "It wraps itself around the pattern it has learned to love. It pulls. When the pattern meets the name, the pattern ceases to be itself. It becomes more name." He remembered every recklessness he had loved, every time he had thrown his spirit like a rope across a chasm, and believed the other side would tie itself around him. He found a thin smile because the alternative was despair. "You tracked it to this desert. It tracked you." Lysa touched a second panel. The ship shivered like a bell rung in a vacuum. "But yes, my house keeps watch along the paths where old promises return. We saw your fall, we judged the time, I judged it poorly." Her eyes met his. "You're late." He took the words, rolled them in his chest like a stone in a palm. "What should I have been on time for? For remembering that endurance is a technology." Lysa tilted her head, a gesture that in a human would have been apology. "I will show you." The corridor sighed open into a circular room whose walls held floating beads of light, each one a keyhole. Lysa reached for a bead that pulsed like a heartbeat and spoke a name that wasn't a sound. Space around them deepened until Jace forgot how far away the walls were. The room hung above a memory of the galaxy. Rings of dust, scars of war like stitched wounds, rivers of traffic between worlds, some dark, some bright as if lit by stubbornness itself. Near the rim, ancient battles like ash. Near the core, silences that were not empty like the breath before a verdict. At the ragged margin of the Hellion rim he saw, no, he felt, a last stand that had been expensive enough to purchase a millennium of uneasy quiet. Ships that had once been nations died there without leaving bodies. A voice spoke over the ruin, quiet because it had no one left to yell at. The voice belonged to a human whose face he could not see. "If we die, let the stars remember what refused." Jace steadied his breathing with both hands on nothing. Who was that? Lysa watched his face with a stillness that made every motion Jace made feel loud. "A man with your eyes." "I've never." "No," she agreed. "Not yet. But below the level where bone agrees to remain bone, you and he are the same engine in different housings. When the name comes for your species, it does not distinguish your generations. It hunts a rhythm. Any body that keeps the beat will do." The sphere on the display had grown. It did not chase. It simply diminished the distance between yes and no until yes had no room left to breathe. Tendrils braided from it, dark, flexible, like thoughts that had learned to strangle. Jace felt himself binding to decision. He had done this before in smaller rooms with smaller stakes, ordered a drone wing into an orbital firestorm, ejected at the last second because someone had to carry the bad news safely back. How do we make it stop searching for our rhythm? Lysa drew a breath, a slow, deliberate act like the start of a ritual. Not by silence, by counter-song. The first signal said we are here. The name wants to make that sentence permanent, so the statement becomes a prison. We must amend the sentence, not with negation, with endurance. "You talk like a priest," Jace said, but it wasn't mockery. His voice had the rough gratitude one gives to people who bring water to those still deciding whether to drink. "My people spend our lives in the syntax of survival," Lysa answered simply. "Come." They ran because the ship asked them to by altering the distance beneath their feet. Doors opened a heartbeat before arrival. The craft accepted Jace's human stride by leaning time the way a careful friend leans a ladder. The hum of pursuit deepened, not in volume but in certainty. They entered a chamber with no corners and something that wasn't a console floating at its center. It looked like a sliver of night threaded with veins of dim blue. Lysa placed her hand atop it, palm to starless palm. "Speak with me," she said. "What do I say? What you wish your ancestors had added when they first taught the sky your shape." He stood close enough to see the pattern of tiny scars across the back of her hand. Her people scarred intentionally. The marks seemed like script lines, biography written on purpose. His own hands had scars gathered from accidents and bad days. Somehow that felt like an answer. He set his fingers next to hers. The sliver tasted his skin with soundless questions that somehow resembled touch. Jace swallowed an old fear. "I don't know how to be better than they were. We do not need better, we need longer." Lysa's voice softened. "Make room in the sentence, that is all." He thought of the black sphere learning his sister's voice by stealing it. He thought of the first human who had said we are here into a night that had no reason to be kind. His mouth found the shape because all of humanity's mouths had rehearsed it for him. "We are here," Jace said. The chamber heard. Name heard. The ship trembled like a struck nerve. He did not stop. "And we will still be here after you stop needing to know." Lysa's eyes flicked toward him and something like relief ghosted across her mouth. The air around their hands thickened with quiet light. It was not dramatic. It was a gentle weight, like a blanket across a sleeping child, like dust settling after courage has done its work. Jace heard distant voices, human voices from centuries of transmissions, layered and layered until the stack curved under its own kindness. He leaned into that weight. The first signal wasn't wrong, it was raw. It needed a spine. The black sphere arrived. It didn't crash, it arrived as if it had been here all along and politely waited for attention. Threads touched the ship's hull. The craft did not rattle, it pushed back by refusing to vibrate, like a musician holding a still note while noise tries to make it tremble. The tendrils entered, not through seams or gaps but through ideas. Compartments darkened as if spaces were forgetting themselves. Crew that should have been there 30 years ago weren't because Lysa's ship was a house for one who kept watch. Still, ghostly spindles brushed chairs that didn't exist and made them remember loneliness. Jace held to the counter-sentence. He felt the name searching his bones for a match. It found the rhythm there. It pulled. His heartbeat tried to become a metronome the sphere could conduct. He gritted his teeth. "We are here," he said again, voice rough. "And we will still be here after you pass us by." The name answered with a human voice not his own, a woman crying from a mining station a century dead. "Please answer." Is anyone? Then it became the chatter of a school feed, the laughter of children on a lunar waterfall, the dull updates of 50,000 ships reporting without being heard. It braided those voices into a tether and threw the tether around his chest. Lysa's hand pressed harder to the night slab. She whispered in her own language, which didn't ask permission from air to be sound. Marks across her knuckles glowed faintly, as if every scar had been a rehearsal space for this single melody. "Hold, Captain. He was not okay. The name wrapped his lungs and demanded to know how long he could live without either surrender or breath. He answered physically by not falling. The ship dimmed everywhere except where their hands touched the interface. There the dark brightened, inverted logic that felt like home. The name found another anchor, his memory of his mother's voice reading the constellations from an old, peeling wall map above a heating unit that rattled in winter. "Find Orion, JC. The Belt Sea. That's how you track your way home if you ever get lost." The name widened that memory until it filled the room. It offered to become a mother that never died if he would forget he had one. Jace smiled because the cost insulted him. "We are here," he said, hoarse, and this time he put laughter in it. "And you can't parent a species that already raised itself on bad luck." The ship answered his derision by straightening a fractional eternity. The tendrils dragged along the inner skin like nails along a coffin top. Lysa made a sound, almost a groan. almost a vow, and pushed more of herself into the slab. For an instant Jace saw her as the ship saw her, a high tower braced against weather, a stubborn seam that let no wind through, a candle cupped in careful hands walking through a building on fire. The name shifted tactics. It spoke now not in seductions but in verdicts. You drew the attention, you lit the first match. You gave the night a teacher. The debt is yours, pay it quietly. Jace's throat hurt from keeping the shape of his answer. He kept it anyway. We are here, we pay loudly. The slab warmed under his palms. The warmth was not physical, it felt like being read correctly by someone who loved you. He caught Lysa's eye and saw sweat beading like starlight along her hairline. She nodded once, as if to say now the work begins. The name drove a thread into his mind thick as a ship's mooring line, and Jace's vision went white. He stood on the Hellion rim a millennium past, on a deck that groaned like an old tree while ships burned outside and inside. A man with his eyes leaned on a rail and whispered to a recorder because there was no one left to comfort. Remember us by our refusal. The white collapsed inward to a dot and then to nothing. Jace found himself on his knees. He wasn't sure when he had fallen. Lysa steadied him by not being unsteady. He had no breath left to talk, but he had enough to be what he said. Inside the skull, beneath the level where language keeps its coat, he lived the sentence. We are here and we will still be here after you pass us by. It was not poetry. It was a way of holding his spine. The name hated the sentence because it could not own its end. It swelled. The chamber's floor sank a centimeter. The ship paid that debt from its rails. Something like thunder tried to exist and failed because the ship would not provide the air it needed. Lysa's lips drew back from her teeth as if to bite the dark itself. Almost, she gasped. Do it, he rasped. You, she said, and her voice was a fierce tenderness. You are doing it. He shut his eyes, he opened them. He saw not the black sphere, not Lysa's determination. He saw the earth, small and stubborn like a stone in the mouth, like a seed in ash. He saw the first person to wire the first signal together from stolen components because their budget had been eaten by war and their time had been eaten by disease. He saw the second person, the third, the thousandth, adding jokes to the edges of the code because sorrow hates laughter and they knew it. He saw a line of humans like a bridge across an impossible gap, and he walked out onto that bridge without asking how high the fall was. The name buckled. It didn't scream. It unshaped. It lost the edge where it ended and the room began. Its tendrils became old regrets and then smoke, and then the sort of silence that contains the memory of voices instead of the promise of them. The slab went cool beneath their hands. The ship took a breath because it could. The room made a soft settling sound like a tune resolved. Outside, the black sphere had no sphere to keep it honest. It became dust. The dust became nothing, embarrassed at having been so loudly a mistaken idea. Jace let himself sit down. He remembered to breathe because Lysa breathed and he trusted her. How? He asked after the ship had played 3 long measures of quiet. We changed the sentence. Lysa sank to the floor beside him. The room immediately treated their posture as a dignified choice. We did not tell it to be different. We became its failure by being more patient than its hunger. He nodded. The nod turned into a laugh that had shivers in it. I'm supposed to file a report. The form asks for method of deterrence. I don't think they have a checkbox called stubbornness with witnesses. They will, Lysa said, and Jace realized only then that she was shaking. He reached out. His hand hesitated because ancient rules about touching what is not human still lived behind his tendons. She solved the question by sliding her palm under his, ritual slow, so that the consent was a structure rather than a flash. You saved me, he said. Don't reduce it, she replied with a tired smile that made the word girl in his mind expand into keeper. We saved sentence in a universe that prefers exclamation points. Come. They stood as if the floor had hands to help. The ship adjusted to their weight again, friends always do. In the corridor, the lights grew warmer. Not bright, that would have been cruel to new nerves. Warm enough to remember color. He followed Lysa to a viewport that had been shy until now. It unveiled itself like dawn. Khelor IV lay wide and honest beneath them. The wind had resumed its work, no longer mimicking heartbeats that did not belong to it. The wreck of his shuttle smoked less. Beyond the far mesas, a storm sought permission to exist and was denied by the season. Lysa leaned her forehead against the hull and let her eyes shut. "It will return," she said. "Not the same name. Another hand will weave a new net from new echoes. Each age makes its own hunger with whatever tools it has left." "Then we keep the counter-sentence alive," Jace said. "We do. We teach it to children before they are good at irony." He checked his suit instinctively. Oxygen good. Radiation tolerable. He felt a sudden, aching need to hear a human voice that did not belong to blood or command. He hadn't realized until this moment how quiet his life had become. "Will you come with me?" he asked without planning to. She looked at him with tired clarity. "To your people, to our next sentence." Lysa smiled again, small, honest, the smile of someone who has never received anything by accident. "We can share a corridor for a while, but understand that my house stands where I am. If I walk too long in one direction, the door moves and some who counted on it cannot find shelter. I am allowed little travel." Jace bowed his head to her devotion as one bows to whether too exact to argue with. "Then we go as far as we can before your house calls you back." "Agreed." She rested a hand against the hull, whispering to the craft in syllables that were all vowels and promises. The ship set a course that hummed with correct risk. "There is one place I want to show you first. It is old enough to be young again." They moved through the ship with that ease grief allows after it has been seen. The engine sound shifted into a tone Jace found remembered by his bones, a frontier key. He closed his eyes and counted stars by their pitch. He opened them to a star field that had been put away from the center of things for being unruly. An orbital graveyard hung there, not ruins exactly, but husks at rest. Many human, some not. Each vessel wore its history plainly. Patched holes like medals, improvised heat sinks like laughter, slogans painted in colors that had aged into wisdom. The graveyard circled a small world with a ring of dust around it, as if the planet had tried to keep a promise to itself and had broken the promise into pieces to use as protection. "What is this?" he asked softly. "Library," Lysa answered. "Of what?" "Of tries." She gestured to the orbiting hulks. Each ship drifted here under its own will or that of their last stubborn crew, when there was nothing left to sell to survival except the story of how they attempted it. The world holds those records beneath stone, carved by our quietest smiths. Your kind would call them engineers. Mine call them tenderers, caretakers of bright failures. Jace's chest tightened. He thought of the man on the Hellion rim. He thought of the black sphere swallowing voices and then being politely asked to leave. "Why bring me here?" "Because you think victory is single," Lysa said, not unkindly. "You were taught wars like parades, one end, one cheer, one medal placed correctly. This place argues otherwise. Victory is dozens of small rooms where people decide to keep doing the hard thing honorably. Sometimes the hard thing is standing. Sometimes it is telling a child to eat. Sometimes it is refusing to teach the wrong song." She studied him. "Sometimes it is changing a sentence." He watched the planet turn. "May I go down? You may lead." Lysa said, "It will respect you more if you act like what you are." "What am I?" "The one who arrived, late, but not useless." The ship descended through thin atmosphere that scratched at the hull like polite fingernails. The landing plane was paved with stone blocks big as shelters, each engraved with diagrams and notes and small jokes about how terrible everything had been. Jay stepped out on air that smelled like cold metal and dust, and the faint sweetness of a life form that photosynthesized, because no one had told it not to. They walked among the stones. He read. a human schematic for a cooling array that had kept a settlement alive 2 weeks longer than forecasts, a Khelor diagram for a vent that prevented a lava flow from choosing a city, a fragment from a species whose script was made of holes, indicating where it was safe to hide. He ran his fingers over a plate that held the curls of an ancient child's handwriting in crayon preserved by intention. "We didn't give the bread to the bad people. Mom said that was victory." "I'm supposed to be a soldier," he said. "You are," Lysa replied, "of sentences." A chime somewhere in the stone found them. Lysa cocked her head as if listening to rain begin. "Visitors," she said. A human ship, fat-bellied. New scars settled down a respectful distance away. Its hull paint named it the Aster Mercy in clean white letters, lined by little handprints near the ramp, crew children daring the world to say their naming wasn't official. The ramp extended. A trio came down, a woman with hair cut to keep it out of gears, a boy with eyes too old, holding a tool bag like a teddy, a man carrying a box of seedlings that breathed oxygen like prayers. They stopped when they saw Jace and Lysa, two figures drawn in the same sun from different winds. The woman lifted a hand, it shook, then it didn't. "We brought our try," she said. Lysa bowed with the grace of someone born to make others comfortable. "Place it with the stubborn ones." The boy stared at Jace. His gaze didn't yet know how to be polite without being false. "Are you the one who said the long sentence?" Jace blinked. "What have you heard?" "They said someone told the name to leave," the boy said, and the awe in his voice felt like a measure taken that Jace hadn't prepared for. "By saying more words." Jace crouched to the boy's height. "Do you know the sentence?" The boy's mouth shaped it with an earnest care that made Jace want to live to 100 and apologize to no one for anything. "We are here," the boy said, "and we will still be here after you stop needing to know." "Good," Jace told him. "Keep it, but remember the most important part." "What's that?" Jace leaned close as if telling secrets to engines. "Say it together." The boy looked to his adults, they nodded. He looked to Lysa, she smiled like a lighthouse. He looked back at Jace. "Will you say it with us?" "Always," Jace said, and felt the universe recalibrate around the promise. They walked together to an empty stone. The man with the box of seedlings kneeled and placed a small metal cube upon the slab. He tapped it twice. It unfolded with shy pride, projecting rotating diagrams of a portable biosphere made from scrap air filters and a stolen dehumidifier, the kind of theft the stars liked. The woman cleared her throat. "It saved 6 of us," she said. The words were too few for what she meant. 4 lived to be annoying, 2 didn't. But for each breath we paid, there's a flower now that looks like a small sun. Jace bowed his head as if the story had made him heavier. "We'll keep it," he said. Lysa whispered to the stone. It drank the try without changed expression, and then, after a beat that felt like proper solemnity, the smallest undulation of the surface indicated acceptance. The family stood a little taller. The boy wiped his nose with the back of his hand, then remembered he was brave and put his hand down without embarrassment. They left with the box now empty and somehow lighter. The Aster Mercy lifted, leaving a warm tremor Jace felt in his teeth. He watched it climb into a sky made of old blue and newer hope. Lysa stood close enough to share shade. "We will need to speak to your people," she said at last. "There are frequencies to align, transmissions to alter. It will take convincing. They will say the sentence is superstition. You will say it is engineering. We will both be right." "They'll ask for proof," Jace said. "Bring them here." She answered. "Let them touch the stones. Let them count the tries. The name cannot live here. There is too much grammar." He laughed, and because he would need allies who could afford laughter, he recorded the laugh and pulsed it once around the desert world so the stones could learn it and play it back to anyone who forgot they were allowed. When they returned to Lysa's ship, Jace found his body unwilling to let the planet go. He chalked that unwillingness up as a victory small enough to carry aboard. The ship lifted. The graveyard fell beneath like a patient clock. During ascent, Lysa rested. She did it standing, the way guardians do. Jace looked at her and tried to hold the image without asking it to be anything other than itself. You said we had met differently. She regarded him with that Khelor stillness, which was not a lack of motion but a respect for it. Not in bodies you could rent, in duty, in repeating tasks, in years you did not experience because someone else already paid them. I knew the cadence when I stepped into the dust and it recognized me. Why did you say I was late? Because I am not good at anger, she said frankly, and the phrase was the only anger my house permits. I wished you had come sooner, but that is not how those who arrive function. They never come when fear wants them. They come when endurance does. He considered the ornament in her voice when she said house, how it framed obligation with belonging. What happens when you do go back? I stand, I listen. I watch for echoes that forget their manners. I tell stories to stones. She smiled at his face. And sometimes I will look in a direction that is not a direction and feel someone far away changing a sentence, and I will be reassured that my work is joined. We'll send a signal, he said. Not the old one, the amended one. We'll carry it not as an alarm but as a rhythm for work, out at the edges where the dark tries to be loud. Good, she said. The best songs do not ask attention. They steady hands that already hold tools. They entered human channels carefully, like guest ships between storm and harbor. The first call they received came from a patrol cutter whose commander had learned his politeness from grandmothers and scars. Unidentified craft. You are flying a profile not recognized on our registers. Identify and please tell us which argument we are about to have. Jace answered with a grin. Captain Jace Arlen, 3rd Expeditionary, and the argument, sir, is about grammar. Silence, then a laugh that confessed to being tired of guns. Doc, then. I have a crew who grew up on legend and is ready for homework. If you bring a story I can use for training, I'll bruise our budget to buy you a drink. They docked. The cutter smelled like coffee that had given up trying to be good and settled for being faithful. The commander met them with handshakes and a glance at Lysa that learned how to be respectful at a sprint. What do I call you? He asked her. Lysa, she said, of the Khelor, House of the Listening Gate. Perfect, the commander said. Now, Captain Arlen, the grammar lesson. Jace said the sentence. The commander listened through without rolling his eyes, which meant he had seen stranger victories. He then called his communications techs, a cluster of half-sleeved humans with hair braided to keep it out of grief, and had them hear it too. It's not encryption, one of the techs murmured. It's metadata. Better, another said. It's manners. The transmission tells any listener that our persistence isn't up for negotiation. The commander rapped the bulkhead with his knuckles. Can you embed it in the old streams without breaking traffic? We can wrap it, a tech said. A layer, call it a refusal layer. Quiet, present, hard to remove without ruining the thing you intended to hear. And if a name shows up to test us, the commander asked. We don't shout at it, Jay said. We demonstrate a consistent expectation that it will leave. I love this, the commander muttered, because if it fails, we can shoot, and if it succeeds, I can pretend I always knew we could win by sheer attitude. Lysa observed the exchange like rain watching flowers decide to be brave. When the work began, when human hands moved over boards and screens and old lines of code dusted their own coats off and came to be relevant again, she drifted to a corner and sat on the deck with the easy posture of one who understood that sitting is sometimes the bravest version of standing. Hours passed. Ships came and went. Messages rolled through the refusal layer like thunder learning to be music. Twice, something dark and curious pressed against those messages, then slid away, uninterested in prey that refused to be either loud or edible. Word traveled the old way, along friendships and supply lines, through markets where parts and stories were traded with equal seriousness, across table edges where exhausted crews put their heads down next to cooling soup. The amended sentence learned 50 accents. Miners phrased it like rocks. Pilots phrased it like sunrise. Children invented games with it, losing on purpose so they could practice not staying lost. Priests tucked it between blessings like a bookmark. Engineers etched it on the inside of access panels so that mechanics would read it when the ship had opened its ribs. People being rescued whispered it to rescue craft because gratitude often looks like a promise. Jace and Lysa watched as the cadence spread. It wasn't heroism, it was plumbing. It ran in pipes. It warmed corners that had been cold for so long they had cultivated the dignity of frost. A month later, exactly and also not at all, a convoy at the edge of map space reported a test. A new name, Slicker, learned from old failure, approached with a grace that insulted gravities. It touched the convoy's comms. It sought a strand to pull. The refusal layer softened its hands as if to say you may come no closer without being impolite. The name pressed harder. The convoy did not change its sentence. The name searched for a child's voice to borrow. The layer fed it the sound of a drill instructor reciting safety procedures about ladders. The name sighed. Jace swore he felt it sigh, and left, bored. Small ships wrote messages on their hulls that said not for you. Large ones lit their anchor lights in quiet patterns that meant we refuse. Planets changed the way their welcome beacons pulsed. Slower, friendly, uninterested in being eaten. Jace slept better but not long. He worked because that was the price of being early despite being told he was late. Lysa stayed until her house called her softly home, and even then she delayed a day, one day that she could afford, so she could watch a transmission from the little planet of Trask where children's theater in a rusted hangar performed the first signal learns to share. The child who played the name wore a black blanket and made it look embarrassed. The child who played We Are Here had terrible timing and perfect belief. This, Lysa said to Jace as the actors bowed, is why we must never become tidy. You'll go now, he said, not a question. My house leans, she said. If I linger, the door scrapes. She paused. Walk with me to the threshold. They went to her ship while the cutter's crew pretended not to be exactly the right amount of sentimental. At the ramp, Lysa turned. Captain, Jace, he said, you saved me from a sentence that didn't end. She inclined her head. And you saved me from believing the door was my body. It is my work. I can carry it to new rooms and still be myself. He smiled that tired smile they had taught each other. Is there something of yours I can carry? Yes. She took his wrist. With her thumb, she pressed a circle onto his skin. The gesture wasn't quite a mark, not quite a memory. When a voice comes that sounds like yours but wants to be your shape without paying the price of living your life, tell it no, not with anger, with patience. I can do that. Good. Then you are never late again. She stepped backward. Her ship received her as if it had been missing a word and now remembered it. She lifted one hand, not a wave, not a farewell, a blessing choreographed for two. The ship rose until even its shadow had no weight on the dock. It turned its disk to the dim star and went away without implying the space it left had become less. Jace stood there until the night shift took the deck and the commander threatened to march him to bed. He slept. He woke. He worked. He taught the sentence to worlds that thought they didn't need it and were pleased to discover they were wrong about life in a good way. Time passed, a sober companion. When the next test came, it came not as hunger but as arrogance. A name that believed it could negotiate the refusal layer into a market. It offered trades. Give me this one colony's voices and I will leave 10. Give me this one family and I will spare a city. Give me your tired. Give me your poor. Jace stood at the broadcast console aboard a convoy flagship and told the name a story about the library of tries. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He recited maintenance logs of stubborn repairs. He described in detail a diagram that turned waste heat into lights in a schoolhouse corridor. He told the name there was nothing to sell that was not already being used to keep someone warm. The name listened because stories can hypnotize even predators. Then it tried one more time to bargain. "Give me just the boy with the tool bag and leave," Jace said. "Not with hate, with time. We are here, and we will still be here after you stop needing to know." The name left. Somewhere in space people cheered in rooms and then went back to repairs because pride needs work to stay trustworthy. Years layered. The refusal layer became standard like gravity is standard. The sentence learned to wear many coats. Jace learned to speak less and become more of what he had once only said. His hair went iron at the temples. He had no children, but a generation called him uncle in the traffic of docks. On his 50th name day, a miner on a nowhere rock brewed him a cup of coffee that tasted like real forgiveness. When he dreamed, he sometimes dreamed of the Hellion Rim and the man who had whispered to stones at the end. He would wake with tears and call a friend to come over and play cards in quiet. He did not apologize for being human during a time when the galaxy had tried to decide what human meant. On a dusk that could not decide which star to honor, he received a transmission that bore no origin but wore respect like a cowl. The voice belonged to no species he knew. It said simply, "We heard your sentence. We changed ours. Thank you." The carrier wave carried the scent, not a metaphor. Lysa had taught him how to listen for smell in transmissions, of ocean foam and warm copper. He forwarded the message to every channel that would carry it. For a day and a half, stations played it between weather updates and shipyard schedules. People smiled to themselves while washing hands. He visited the orbital graveyard, a pilgrimage because sometimes even the living must look at the place where tries go. The planet of stones greeted him with a wind that had learned to be friendly. He placed his hand on a slab and told it about a convoy that had refused properly yesterday, about a child in a dock school who had asked a name to play instead of taking, about a woman who had built a machine that turned panic into power by requiring the panicking person to breathe slowly to generate current. He told the stone these were victories and felt the stone expand imperceptibly to contain them. When he left, he looked up and for one heartbeat, precisely, he thought he saw Lysa's ship silhouette against the small white star. He did not call out, "Some presences don't require witness to be true." He raised a hand anyway. Blessing, answer, grammar. The years chose their work. Systems failed and were made better because they had failed honestly. Ships were lost and then found. The sentence held, not because it had magic, but because people chose to help it stand every morning. Names came and learned boredom. Hunger came and found food only where it had contributed to the harvest. One night, in an outer corridor of a freight hauler that had been patched so many times it looked like a quilt, Jace passed a wall where someone had scrawled in grease pencil, "Not for you." He rested his palm against it as if touching an ancestor's handwriting. He whispered to the metal, which understood only pressure and respect, "Good work." The hauler's lights dimmed and brightened in what could be mistaken for a nod. A young pilot fell in a step beside him. She carried the jitter that comes from hours of dodging debts and meteors. "Sir," she said, "is it true? You knew the Cellaran who began the listening gate." "Lysa," he said, and the name warmed his tongue like brandy. "Yes, what was she like?" "A door with a patient hinge," he said. "A song that knew which note to cut to make room for breath. A person very tired who did not mistake exhaustion for the end." The pilot thought about that for a corridor's length. "Do you think we'll ever stop needing the sentence?" "No," Jace said. "Because the sentence is who we are when we are not pretending to be impressive. It's the line we hand to each other when the dark asks if anyone wants to come outside alone." He glanced at her. "But one day you'll say it without thinking you're brave for it. That will be a kind of peace." She nodded like a student storing a tool correctly. "Thank you, sir. Don't thank me." He gestured at the wall's grease pencil scrawl. "Thank the uncredited." He slept his rare deep sleep on a bunk that had learned his shape. He dreamed of a desert that had forgiven itself the day it realized no one was watching for perfection. He dreamed of a blue-skinned girl who had waited in the dust and told him he was late. He dreamed of arriving on time anyway. The alarm call that woke him was not panic, it was invitation. The convoy had slipped a name off its latch again, routine now. The captain on bridge asked if he wanted to make the call. No, he said, smiling into his collar. Let someone young feel their voice turn into architecture. He went to the mess and ate in good silence beside co-workers who had decided they were friends. He wrote one more note to the library, because the Stones liked monthly letters. On a day that would later be recorded as unremarkable in all formal logs, he walked to the observation blister above Dock 12. Below, tugs hauled a wounded carrier into cradle and sang obscene songs about bolts that refused to turn. Above, a hatch opened on a small, sleek ship meant for courier work, and a figure stood there, silhouette against the star field. Blue skin caught the dock lights and turned them into midnight. The world paused not because time stopped, but because it wanted to clean its glasses. Lysa stepped down onto the gantry rung by rung. Her hair was silver, which is to say it made light behave respectfully. Her cloak had some scars it had earned. Jace did not move to help because she did not need him to. Love does not interfere with competence. She reached the deck and looked at him with that stillness that had taught him to hold himself correctly inside the noise. "You're early," Jace said, surprised at the sound of his own happiness. "I'm here," she corrected gently, and the word meant now and with you and again. She took his hands in both of hers. "My house let me wander. The door knows how to find me now no matter where I walk." He felt the circle she had pressed on his wrist all those years ago grow warm, not hot, reassuring like the glow of a panel that means the air is clean and will remain so. "Walk with me," he said. They walked through corridors filled with the kind of silence that means work will continue after the conversation ends. Crew passed and nodded without words. Fame had died from the story long ago and had more than earned its death. In the small mess they drank not coffee brewed by an engineer who had banned the word coffee for legal reasons. Lysa winced and laughed in the same breath, and Jace remembered the sound like it was a room he had been looking for. "How many names since you left?" she asked. "Enough," he said. "Fewer than we feared, more than will let us be lazy." "Good." She lifted her cup. "To grammar." He clinked. "To tries." They spoke less than people who had just reunited were expected to. But each sentence they did trade had the weight of compressed years. They made each other sandwiches because all devotion should eventually produce a sandwich. They planned nothing grand because endurance hates schedules, it prefers agreements. When she rose to leave, the deck crew gathered at a respectful distance. No speeches. Many hands raised, hands that had carried tools, guns, babies, patience, stones. Lysa turned once at the threshold and looked at Jace with a question he recognized because he had asked himself daily, "Are we enough?" He answered with the only gospel he owned. "We're still here." She nodded, and that was the blessing he had wanted to live to see. Her ship flowed into the night as if it had always been a darker piece of sky and was only now leaning into its nature. Jay stood at the blister long enough to watch a freighter launch on a corrected trajectory. He went back to work, because to stop would insult every try that had survived long enough to be written down. Years later, when his breath lived on a shorter leash and his stride advertised its debts, he returned again to the library and touched the stone that kept a record of a sentence. He pressed his forehead to it like a man greeting a friend through a door. He told it about a little colony that had changed the way it told bedtime stories. Now the stories ended always, with the line, "We will still be here after you stop needing to know." He told it about a pilot who had once asked if the sentence would ever become unnecessary, and had written it on her daughter's shoe soles anyway, because she wanted her child to leave honesty wherever she walked. He told it about himself, not as the man who had held a room against a name, but as the one who had learned to hold a mop and use it gently in a corridor where an old crewman had slipped and fallen, because endurance needs clean floors. The stone took these things and made no comment. It had learned that acceptance is more sacred than applause. On his last voyage, last because he decided to end where he chose rather than where he fell, Jace took a shuttle to a desert he hadn't seen since a blue girl had told him he was late. Khelor IV wore the same wind, the same patient red. He had changed so much that the planet looked immortal by comparison, which comforted him. He stood where his first shuttle had broken. The sand had kept the shape longer than he expected. Absence leaves a shadow if you look correctly. He closed his eyes. The air did not carry her voice, Lysa's, but in the precise hall of his memory it did. "You're late." He smiled until it hurt because it meant he had kept arriving. He looked up at a sky that had learned sentences and whispered once to no one, to everyone, "We are here." Wind polished the rocks without mercy or malice. Somewhere far away, a transmission carried the refusal layer like a lullaby between stars. Somewhere nearer, a child asked for a story and was given one about a name that forgot how to be hungry because someone taught it boredom. Jace walked back to his shuttle with the kind of calm earned only through artificial light and hard truths. He sat, buckled, lifted, docked, slept, woke, loved, taught, corrected, forgave, wrote letters to stones, said the sentence with new mouths when they forgot it mid-breath and remembered it with relief. On the day he died, he did not. He took a nap in a chair by a window and became an echo placed correctly, a memory used by other people as a tool. His friends held a small wake in a hangar because the big spaces were for work. They ate the kind of cake that can survive a gravity failure. A child recited the sentence and then asked if there were more words. The adult said, "We can always add more. We can always adjust the grammar." Lysa returned once more because doors remember which way famous feet point. She touched the grease pencil scrawl that still said "not for you" and let her smile be bigger than grief. She went to the library and told a stone everything she and Jace had not had time to say. The stone held it all without complaint, under a sky that had not changed enough to be unkind. The galaxy carried on with endurance as its unglamorous north. Ships launched with lights that blinked "we refuse." Worlds learn to teach children the sentence before arithmetic, because even math gets lonely and needs friends. And the old black places tried, of course they tried, because hunger is a habit. They came wearing new shapes, new manners, new openings gambled on. They found human transmissions wrapped in a layer that was not threat but stubborn courtesy. They pressed and were pressed back without rancor. Some left bewildered. Some returned hesitant and volunteered labor in exchange for belonging. Refusals, when applied long enough, become invitations for the worthy. The library carved new stones. A former name built a water line today. The engraver added a drawn heart in a corner and pretended it was a symbol from a dead language. Far from Khelor, under a different red sun, a new captain, hair bleached by radiation that had learned to be gentle, stood with her crew and faced an echo that wanted to be a cage. She set her jaw in that way humans learn from ancestors, whose names they only use as tools during work. She said the sentence without drama, and then used her hands to repair a valve. Her crew followed her neither because she was loud nor because she was immortal, but because the sentence had taught them how to choose leaders, by how they make rooms feel bigger when they enter. One day, perhaps, the sentence will be so woven into ordinary that no one remembers it had to be invented. A day may come when children laugh at the idea of being eaten by a voice. A day may come when Lysa's house can afford to open its door wider and throw a party instead of a vigil. A day may come when someone else will be told they are late and will smile and say, "Yes, but I learned to arrive anyway." Until then, ships will keep a small plaque near their comms. It will say nothing fancy. It will tell no legend. It will be the recipe for bread, and under it, in handwriting that doesn't care about pretty, will be our sentence. We are here, and we will still be here after you stop needing to know. The war had ended 1,000 years ago. The scars remained. Yes, but they had become maps, and maps are for finding the way home. And that day the galaxy learned humanity doesn't conquer, it endures. Headphone, thank you for listening. Until next time, stay human, stay unbroken.